Thanks so much for your time, Jonathan, even when you're so busy.
It's always really, really fun to hang out with you. And the questions you have are always so juicy.
uh, so I have a few practice questions and a few live questions. Maybe we can start with the practice question. Aha. Yeah. I think for many people who meditate, whether they're doing it for a long time or just starting out, one of the pitfalls, including me, is that we consider meditation as a doing, something we have to do. So yeah, it becomes kind of like an extra tension to our day, like, oh, I still have to meditate. So the question here is, then how can we practice in such a way that it's with more ease, with less stress, and that it's just more enjoyable without the have to, if possible?
As soon as you figure that out and you get the answer, let me know. I spent 24 years living in an ashram where practice was core. It was really what we were there for, was to really practice deeply. And we were constantly having to look for ways to keep inspired in our practice, because it's just hard to keep it going, because part of it is inherently really pleasant, but part of it is kind of inherently unpleasant. Jason Siff, who wrote the book Unlearning Meditation, had this great observation I loved. He said, as soon as you start a meditation practice, you are starting something else, which is called meditator's guilt. You're not meditating often enough, you're not meditating deep enough, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it just comes with a package, here's something I want to do. And then suddenly there's a lot of joy and discovery in it. And then suddenly it becomes work. And there are a couple of reasons why. One is, I find oftentimes when people start meditation practice, it's unbelievable. It's like they just feel like tension dropping away, and they just feel really, really good. And as the joke goes, if you meditate, you'll feel better. You feel your depression better, you feel your rage better, you feel your sadness better, We start to feel what's actually there. And it's difficult sometimes. So one of my teachers had this great statement where he said, most people stop practicing specifically because their practice is working. It's designed it's designed to bring us in contact with reality. And reality sometimes isn't completely jived with our preferences in life. So a couple practical things. One of them is just pure semantics, and that is to try to translate, instead of I have to meditate, to I get to meditate. A little difference in there, you might get a little charge of that for a day or two. But there are a couple other things that can be helpful. One of them is to find a way to associate pleasure to it. So there is a technique that's referred to as gladdening the mind, where before you meditate, think of some things you're grateful for, and meditate on that. And it kind of brings you into a sense of appreciation and gratitude. And appreciation and gratitude are kind of a drug, they get you into a more open state. So that can be really, really helpful. Take some time to reflect on what you're grateful for, what you appreciate. That'll help to set the field. The other thing you can do, and this is a real kind of a hard practice as well, is to think about offering the fruit of your practice to be a benefit to others. And that can be done before a meditation. Like, may this next 20 minutes be of service to my family and to those I love and those I work with. May they receive the benefits of this. And sometimes that'll sometimes bring in a little bit of inspiration around realizing you're not doing it just for yourself, but you're doing it really for the benefit of the people you love and live with and work with. One other thing I do that we do in our groups is that we have little pods of people and you send a text or an email, and in the subject line, it just simply says, meditated for 20 minutes. And no response needed, but there's someone out there who's accountable, that you're accountable to. That can be helpful too. So I spent a lot of time wrestling this one, and it's described as a meditation practice is swimming upstream. It takes resilience and effort, and we need to look for every little trick in the book to keep it alive.
Yeah, related to this is that when we make time for meditation, let's say we manage to find time and to have the motivation, and then this inner voice will say, you already addressed it a little bit, that this is not, I'm not doing it well, or this is I should try harder, I should be more focused. So all the shoulds that we then encounter, of course, when we meditate long enough, hopefully we will be able just to observe these thoughts without being so caught up in them, but it can be very, very difficult. So do you have a word of advice for this voice inside of us that is just never satisfied with what we are doing, and how to navigate that?
It's a great question, and part of it is recognizing that we have a built-in negativity bias in us. We're pretty much scanning for what's not working. So that's just inherent to our nature. And we have this tendency, after a meditation, to give ourselves a report card, and we tend to think that the meditations where your mind was like a chipmunk on caffeine, totally unable to focus, like those are the really bad ones, and the ones where your mind was calm, those are the good ones. But the analogy that I often use, and many people use, is imagine you're swimming across, you're paddling a boat across a lake, and in one direction, the wind is coming at you and water splashing over the boat, and you're having to recorrect your course, and it's really, really hard. You get to the other side, you turn around, and suddenly the wind shifts, is right behind you and is pushing you back. Well, which was the better practice? And you can easily make a case that the meditation the paddling session you had, where you're having to really develop your skill and really stay focused and build strength and resilience, you could say that was the best one. You got the most out of that. So in that same way, when we're in meditation and we're going through that season of self-judgment and the mind unable to focus and restlessness and all of that stuff, and you keep coming back, those are maybe the best meditations, because you're strengthening your witness. You're strengthening your capacity to observe without judgment, and you're developing your resilience. So I often joke when I'm on a retreat, well, after a meditation, I'll ask, well, was that a good meditation or a bad meditation? And pretty soon you realize, they're all good. But again, here it's helpful to have people you can talk to about your meditation. And when you realize that if your mind is struggling, and then you hear from others and you realize, well, they have the same affliction, that really, really helps to realize you're not alone in the practice.
Yeah, because as you already said, Jonathan, it's swimming against the stream. Like making time to do nothing, to observe your breathing, it's quite unusual in our society that's fast-paced and that's just so busy, and there's always the next thing to do. I have this question in my heart that is it enough that we try to make time to be still, to be with ourselves, to swim against the stream? Is that enough if our society doesn't also change along? Because it's so difficult to go against the stream all the time. And there's so many people, this is going to be a long question. There's so many people that are suffering from the fact that our society puts so much pressure. When I say our society, I guess it's in Europe, but it's also in the US, that we're just bombarded with information and with things we have to do, and we have to be successful, and we have to look good, and we have to make money, and we have to do this and that. And it's just putting so much pressure on ourselves, and it's making us miserable and ill even. So many people are burnt out. So I guess I'm just very worried about the way we are living. And so as a mindfulness teacher myself, I try to motivate and encourage people to go against the stream, but sometimes I wonder, isn't it just too much in this society, and isn't something else needed? Something more like really a collective transformation.
Yeah.
Question mark.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great, I mean, I so appreciate your question, because in there is really the reflection and seeing clearly all the suffering out there in the world, you know, and it's so hard to stay awake in a world where everyone is running in the opposite direction. But here's the interesting thing, is that I'm not sure it's any different than it's ever been. You know, like back in the Buddha's awakening, allegedly, you know, one of his first observations was, oh my God, everyone is looking for happiness in exactly the wrong way. Everyone is thinking they're going to get happy by fulfilling something that is actually temporary. That, you know, they're trying to satisfy the senses, or they're trying to satisfy the mind, and all of that is just like building a skyscraper on sand. You know, that real happiness is actually unconditional. You know, the happiness we really want is a happiness that isn't dependent on externals. And recognizing that is huge. Engaging in the practice is really, really challenging. And what I find is that if you want to make a shift, you really need to have like-minded people. This is why there have been monasteries, and why there have been ashrams, and why there have been, you know, meditation centers, and why we've had to collect together with people who really, really want something. Because if we're swimming upstream, it's exhausting, and it's a lot easier when you are associated with other people. Kind of goes back to the question around practice. You know, in the ashram where I lived, we had a phrase that said, company is stronger than willpower. When you're associated with like-minded people, it's a lot easier. So the question becomes, how do we cultivate a shift, you know, in a culture that looks pretty insane right now, you know, because there's so much information, there's so much stimulation, you know, and I think part of it'll be through individuals, but it'll also be through groups, you know, kind of making a difference in the world. I think it was the Dalai Lama who said, if every 8-year-old learned how to meditate, we would have a world without war. I don't know if that's true, but it's possible. I definitely see that as being possible. So it's a challenge, and I know for my wife Tara and myself, we were just talking this morning. We just read the headlines, and it's so depressing. But we have to keep going on. That was a long response to your long question.
Yeah. Do you feel worried about the state of the world?
I do. I do feel worried. And again, some great poet said, sometimes it's helpful to take the 3,000-year view. You know, so if I look at where we are in the context of 3,000 years, you know, there are just fluctuations and waves, you know, that occur, and we're part of it, and we do the best we can. And the truth is that, you know, we're here now, and we can be gone in a moment. You know, just be gone from this plane in a moment. So it's such a mystery. I think part of it is we just carry on. We ultimately, when we're doing our path, it's really what we can't not do. So for me to have this practice and to have kind of the joy and the fulfillment of seeing other people get lit up through the practice, I'm grateful to be doing that. And I know for you as well, I joke, we're in the suffering business, and business is booming, but we're also in the freedom from suffering business too.
That's another, maybe a misunderstanding that people have about meditation, that it's egocentric or self-centered, right? And that that people also feel guilty when they take the time for themselves because they have to be there for other people, like for their family, for their children. I notice this in my students or the participants, often women, that they find it so hard to take even just 20 minutes for themselves.
Yeah.
And that there's this idea that it's bad and egoistic, and they feel guilty.
Here's an interesting thing, though, I find. And this becomes, we're cultivating two wings of the practice. One is wisdom, the capacity to see what's true, transcendent of your beliefs, your preferences, your embellishments, your stories, what's actually true. Then the other wing is the wing of cultivating a heart that can hold what you find, that wing of compassion. And if that gets out of balance, then you're messed up, because if you can look through the wing of wisdom and you just kind of see cause and effect, karma. So you can see someone suffering and you can think, well, you must have caused that suffering in another lifetime, so good luck. Pretty cold. But if you look through the lens of compassion without wisdom, that's when we burn out. That's when we're simply responding to the suffering. And that's where we find ourselves trying to learn other people's lessons for them. And we can't do that. And so that becomes a really integral part of the practice, is to see the suffering, to look for the lessons that are hopefully being learned. And rather than to take on someone's suffering, to really help them to skillfully learn what they need to learn and integrate what they need to integrate. So the analogy that I always come back to, it's a bit of a cliche, but it's that line that says, "My cup runneth over." The times when you're well slept, you're well fed, you're relaxed, you're feeling so good that being nice is effortless. It's overflow. And when people say to me, this meditation, it's so self-indulgent, it's so narcissistic, my response is, getting your cup to overflowing is actually your responsibility. And whatever you need to do to fill your cup, that's actually your gift to the world. Because when you're serving from overflow, it's very, very different than serving from burnout. The analogy, I remember I read this one book about a very poor family, and the father was a laborer and a hunter and a trapper. And so when they would have a meal, he would eat first, and then the rest of the family would eat. Because there was that recognition that if he didn't have the energy to go out and bring in more money or bring in the next meal, then everyone was going to starve. And that's the paradox for each of us who are on a path, is that we have to be well nourished in order to keep going. And if you really want to make a difference in the world, you will make it's a big difference between serving from overflow, compassion, and kindness, and serving from burnout and anger and resentment. So I think it's important to have kind of an intellectual understanding of how actually when you step back from your world, it makes a big difference. There's a story of a Zen monk who said, I meditate every day for 30 minutes, except when I'm really busy. And when I'm really busy, I meditate for 60 minutes. You know, it's like the more we have going on in our lives, the more we need to be stepping back.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you so much. It's always so much fun to spend some time with you.
Yeah.